The Incredible Hulk came into this world thanks to an act of devastation, and he remained a personification of rage and anger and sheer brutality, and his comic book history reflects that. And today, I'm going to show you exactly what I mean. Speaking of which, let's start with Old Man Logan. The Hulk and Wolverine have had one of the oddest rivalries. It all started when the Wolverine was introduced in the Hulk comics, in The Incredible Hulk issue number 181, and they've had many rematches over the years, with some of the most notable appearing in What If, Volume 2, number 50, Ultimate Wolverine vs. Hulk, World War Hulk, X-Men, Savage Wolverine number 5, and The Incredible Hulk number 340. But their nastiest bout was definitely in Old Man Logan. Following a huge conflict where the villains managed to band together and wipe out almost all the heroes, a pretty sinister Bruce Banner took over a section of California with his inbred kids, the Hulk Gang. In the last few issues of that story, in revenge for the Hulk wiping out his family, Wolverine went on the warpath and eradicated most of the gang. Banner hulked out into this 30-foot tall nasty Hulk and ate Wolverine alive, only for Wolverine to reform inside his stomach and cut his way out. This wasn't the end of the Hulk though, and Old Man Logan would face not only the Hulk again, but even his smarter, devious counterpart, the Maestro. Speaking of Maestro, that brings me to my next memorable moment. For any of you who might not know, Maestro is a version of the Hulk that came to us in the Future Imperfect storyline, taking place in an alternate universe. Thanks to a nuclear conflict that wiped out almost all the superheroes and most of humanity, the Hulk actually thrived. He began absorbing all this radiation from the conflict, making the strongest, smartest version of the Hulk that had been seen up until that point. Maestro Hulk took control of the remnants of New York, called Dystopia, and he ruled it with an iron fist. Future Imperfect essentially gave us our regular 616 Professor Hulk, traveling to this alternate future and facing the Maestro version of himself. Maestro completely pummeled the living snot out of Professor Hulk, eventually snapping his neck, and then villain monologuing at him the whole time. Professor Hulk only won when he brought Maestro back in time to when the Gamma Bomb first went off, and he let Maestro succumb to the blast. As you do. When fights between Wolverine and Maestro were pretty brutal, another character who often fights the Hulk would be Hyperion. These two absolute powerhouses have also faced off a bunch of times, but if we're looking for brutality here, I shall turn your attention to Heroes Reborn number 2 by Jason Aaron. This story found a new Hyperion, who had just wiped out Galactus by flying straight through his head, fought off against versions of Gladiator and the Imperial Guard, Mr. Beyonder, and a giant version of Ultron. But the last thing he needed to do was stop the Hulk. Hyperion finds him trying to tell a group of kids about how he's not crazy, how history has changed, and how he's sad, which makes it almost upsetting after the Hulk gets his hands on Hyperion's throat. Hyperion invokes an executive order and uses his laser eyes to blow holes into the Hulk, taking his life until he finally stops getting back up. Let's move on to Emil Blonsky, who has been an enemy of the Incredible Hulk for a long time. So it doesn't come as a surprise that he's also taken some of the most brutal beatings that the Hulk has dished out. Granted, I'm not gonna say he doesn't deserve them. In Incredible Hulk issue 54 from 2004, Emil makes the small mistake during a massive scuffle of reminding Bruce/Hulk how he ended Betty Ross's life with his irradiated blood and asking if the Hulk ever thinks about that. And to that I say, my guy, what the heck are you thinking? To the shock and surprise of nobody, this throws Hulk into a fit of rage, double-fisting Abomination into the sky and absolutely pummeling him, with one panel showing the Hulk punching Abomination so hard his fist looks like it completely implodes the villain's face, with chunks flying off. And then he throws Abomination into a helicopter. You know, just cuz. Just so we're aware, Abomination isn't a pushover. He regularly throws punches with the Hulk, even beating him a couple of times. But Hulk put him down in a few pages, and all it took was a mistake of a few choice words. Think before you speak, folks. The end series chronicles the last days of various different characters in the Marvel Universe. For a lot of Doomsday type stories, it often ends in the Earth being destroyed in a nuclear war. But what remains after that? Well, basically the Hulk. That's it. That's all. Just the end of the world and the Hulk. As the only human left on planet Earth, Bruce Banner wanders the aftermath in an eternal struggle with himself, as in an eternal struggle with the Hulk. Basically, Bruce has seen the deaths of everybody he loved, everybody he cared about. There's nothing left in this world for him, and he just wants to pass on. But no matter what he does, the Hulk's not gonna let him. Hulk not only stops Banner from ending his own life, but the Hulk doesn't succumb to anything. Not even giant mutated cockroaches that essentially swarmed and devoured as much of the Hulk as they could. Bruce and Hulk have a huge internal falling out, but then Bruce has a heart attack that actually ends his life, or at least half his life. Because while the Hulk himself goes on to survive, now he realizes just how alone he really is. While Bruce is naturally the core figure in his family tree, the roots of the Hulk's rage actually come from his father, Brian Banner. And without him, there really wouldn't be a Hulk. Now for this point, I'm not really talking about one specific moment, because the brutal part of this is the character of Brian Banner entirely. If there's a villain in this story, it's Brian. He physically and emotionally mistreated his wife Rebecca and their son. As seen in Incredible Hulk number 312 from 1968, Brian became deeply disturbed and obsessed with this idea that his radiation research had turned his son, Bruce into a little monster. Brian was even responsible for the passing of Rebecca in front of Bruce, which led directly to the development of multiple personalities for Bruce, including the Hulk, which is essentially the personification of rage in a child who has been severely mistreated. Now, if I were forced to pick one moment, it would be when Brian actually died, which appeared to be at the hands of Bruce himself in a graveyard, as one does. All of which happened in The Incredible Hulk issue 1, by the way. It's honestly incredibly tragic. Years later, during the Chaos War, Brian actually emerged on Earth as a fearsome Hulk of his own before he was defeated and returned to the afterlife. More recently, Brian made a lot of trouble in Immortal Hulk as a servant or incarnation of the One Below All. Near the end of the Planet Hulk storyline, the shuttle the Hulk was sent to Sakharin by the Illuminati at the beginning of the Planet Hulk storyline blows up, wiping out the Green Scar's wife and child. Hulk reaches a whole new level of anger, which is directed at those who sent him here, the Illuminati. So he headed to Earth with his Warsworn. He made a quick stop in the moon to defeat Black Bolt of the Inhumans, but when he got to Earth, he headed to New York, giving the city a time limit to be evacuated. And when that time limit stopped, well, he defeated everyone who was left. Iron Man and the Hulkbuster, the Avengers and their tower, the US Army, the X-Men, Fantastic Four, Juggernaut, Doctor Strange, using the power of Zom. You know, one of the most powerful magical monsters in all of Marvel Comics, all while saving innocent bystanders. He then threw the Illuminati members he captured into the ring against each other, sparing them since he only really sought justice. He was eventually sorta defeated by the Sentry, who he fought until they both reverted back to their human forms, which is when Bruce Banner knocked Bob Reynolds right out. And then the comic version of Miek takes the life of Bruce's friend Rick, and the Hulk just goes absolutely ballistic, creating earthquakes with his footsteps and almost destroying the world. It would appear Tony Stark grew a little tired of getting beat up by the Hulk over the years. This basically came to a breaking point in the Immortal Hulk story when the Hulk faces off against the Avengers and Stark's pretty new Hulkbuster gets completely wrecked. This caused him to use what he referred to as the Big Gun, aka the Helios laser, a massive space laser laced with UV radiation that, when unleashed onto the Hulk during one of his rampages, completely fried the Hulk to dust. When Hulk woke up, since, you know, he's immortal in this story now, he could be terminated, so instead he found that he'd been sliced up with an adamantium razor and placed in a dozen different jars. He had his hand in one, his heart in another, his lungs on another shelf. It's pretty messed up, since a jar with his living head was basically forced to watch as a scientist dissected him further to study. Yeah. No thank you, hard pass. In 1995, Marvel released the last Avengers story, and with a title like that, from 1995, you can imagine it's not exactly all sunshines and rainbows. And you'd be correct. Within the first few pages, the current Avengers of this alternate future and their base are completely wiped out by an absolutely massive explosion caused by Ultron 59. But that's not even the worst part. At some time in the past, this universe's version of the Incredible Hulk turned evil, thanks to an event that happened fighting alongside Thor, the Thing, and Hercules. The Hulk turned against his fellow Avengers, Wonder Man, Hawkeye, Mockingbird, and Tigra, who absolutely got it the worst. Tigra against the Hulk is not a fight you would normally expect, and this comic tells you why. Since in her attack against the Green Goliath, Hulk simply grabs her by her legs and arms and pulls her apart in a scene kind of like Sentry ripping apart Ares in the Siege event, but way scarier and more terrifying. Hawkeye and Mockingbird literally flee for their lives, while Wonder Man flew into a rage and he and the Hulk had a slugfest that ended with Wonder Man detonating and wiping both himself and the Hulk from existence. I know I've already mentioned one instance from the Immortal Hulk storyline that I felt was extremely nuts, but to be quite honest, the entire story is one big brutal collection. What's happening in some of the comic panels is almost hard to even decipher, as the legendary art is grabbing every inch of your attention, with horrifying body horror that I've never really seen in a comic before. There's nothing like this. Moments where he escaped from those jars he had been placed into, and his different displaced parts start merging together around this helpless scientist who basically gets consumed by the body of Hulk, or when the leader basically becomes a horrifying monster swallowing Brian Banner and ripping the Devil Hulk apart, or when Hulk rips his own face off, or when he mutates into a giant monster at the end of one particular timeline and destroys literally everything in existence, consuming the sentience of the universe. The whole Immortal Hulk run is just pure horror from start to finish, wrapped in an incredible Hulk wrapping paper. And that brings us to the end of our time together once again. If you enjoyed my ramblings today, could you help us out by giving this video a like? And while you're at it, let me know if you agree or disagree with the points made today in the comments. I've been Alexa, resident emo girly, and see you next time, nerds.